At the head of the room, a woman stood holding a silver tray. No chair pulled out for her, no plate set in her name. "This is a family dinner," the aunt said, smiling like she was doing everyone a favor. "She can help serve while we discuss things she wouldn't understand anyway." A cousin laughed into his glass. Nobody looked at the woman holding the tray. She didn't cry. She set the tray down on the sideboard instead of lifting it, and she looked the aunt dead in the eye, until the aunt looked away first. "Better she learns her place before he gets back tomorrow," the uncle said, reaching for the wine. In the doorway behind them, a tall man in a dark suit had been standing for 4 minutes. Nobody had heard the front door. Nobody had heard his car pull into the long gravel drive. He was already back. He'd been back the whole time. "Before we dive in, are you watching by yourself or with someone? And where are you watching from? Tell us your location in the comments. Welcome to Afro-Korean Scope, where every story unfolds into an unforgettable experience." 2 years earlier, Taehyun stood at the edge of a hotel ballroom in Seoul, watching Kamaria cross the room in a red dress that made every head turn except his. His head had turned the second she walked in the building, an hour before that. "You're staring," she said, stopping in front of him with 2 glasses of champagne. "I'm observing. That's just staring with better vocabulary." She handed him a glass. "Your family keeps looking at me like I wandered in from the wrong party." "You did wander in from the wrong party. You're supposed to be at the embassy reception 3 floors up." "I know." She smiled over the rim of her glass. "I got bored up there. Down here looked more interesting." They talked until the caterers started clearing tables, and then they talked in the hotel lobby until a security guard politely suggested they take it somewhere with actual seating. He walked her back to her hotel that night without once trying anything, which she later told him was the exact reason she gave him her number. He married her 11 months later, in a small ceremony his mother didn't attend, and his father sat through with his jaw locked the entire time. Taehyun never asked his father what that silence meant. He assumed, wrongly, that silence was just how the older man expressed things he didn't have words for. He learned differently over the 2 years that followed, one small cut at a time. A wedding seating chart that put Kamaria's table so far from the head table she needed opera glasses to see her own reception. A family portrait commissioned for his grandmother's 80th birthday that somehow never included her. An oversight nobody apologized for. Comments in Korean, murmured just quiet enough, that he caught only fragments of, until Kamaria, 3 months into learning the language on her own, without telling him why, started catching all of it. She never told him what she understood. She absorbed it instead, quietly, the way she'd learned to absorb things her whole life, believing some cost was worth paying to keep the peace inside a family she'd married into. She told herself it was temporary, that time would soften them, that proving herself patient and gracious and endlessly composed would eventually earn her something she shouldn't have had to earn in the first place. Taehyun believed the peace was real. He believed it right up until the night he came home a day early, walked through his own front door, and heard his aunt's voice before he saw her face. Back in the dining room, Taehyun didn't move from the doorway. He watched his aunt reach for more wine like nothing had happened. He watched his uncle glance toward the empty seat where Kamaria's plate should have been, and say nothing about it. He watched a young cousin, Ariam, open her mouth like she might object, then close it again, and stare hard at her napkin instead. Kamaria hadn't seen him yet. She picked the tray back up, because refusing twice would have started a fight she didn't want to have in front of 12 people, and began serving the table anyway, calm, composed, giving nobody the satisfaction of watching her break. She moved down the table with the tray balanced against her hip, refilling a plate here, clearing one there, her spine straight the entire time. That composure was what finally moved him. He stepped into the room. The conversation didn't stop all at once. It died in pieces, moving down the table like a wave, until his aunt turned and saw him standing there, and the wine glass in her hand went very still. "Taehyun?" she said. "We weren't expecting you until morning." Clearly. He walked past her without slowing down, past his uncle, past the cousins who suddenly found their plates fascinating, straight to where Kamaria stood holding the tray. He took it from her hands and set it down on the table himself, hard enough that a fork rattled against a plate. Then he pulled out a chair, not any chair, the one at his own right hand, the one that had been quietly, deliberately left empty at the far end of the table for her instead, and held it out. "Sit," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear it clearly, though the whole room understood the shape of the word. Kamaria sat. Taehyun sat beside her, unfolded his napkin like he'd been there the entire meal, and looked down the length of the table at his family with an expression so calm it was worse than anger. "Please," he said, "continue. I wouldn't want to interrupt whatever you were discussing that my wife wouldn't understand." Nobody spoke for a long moment. His aunt's hand tightened around her glass. His uncle cleared his throat and reached for the serving spoon like it might save him. The rest of the dinner happened in near silence, guests picking at food they no longer wanted, glancing at each other, none of them brave enough to be the first to leave, and none of them able to stay comfortably either. Ariam kept sneaking looks at Kamaria across the table, something like guilt working across her young face. The moment dessert plates were cleared, the guests left fast, murmuring thanks that nobody meant. Coats gathered too quickly, cars pulling away from the estate one after another, until the house went quiet. Taehyun and Kamaria sat alone at the long table, most of the candles burned down to stubs, wax pooling on the silver holders. "How long?" he said finally. Kamaria didn't pretend not to understand the question. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She looked at the tablecloth instead of him. "Since the wedding, little things, mostly. Tonight was just the first time you were standing close enough to see one of them happen." Something in his face changed, a kind of controlled devastation settling in behind his eyes. "You never told me." "I didn't want you choosing between me and them," she said. "I thought if I could just carry it quietly enough, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't cost us anything real. It cost you 2 years of dinners like tonight." His voice cracked slightly, the first real break in his composure since he'd walked through that door. "That's not nothing, Kamaria. That's not a price I ever agreed to." She finally looked at him. "I know that now." He reached across the table and took her hand, the same steady, wordless gesture he'd given her under the table earlier. Except now there was no table hiding it, no audience to perform composure for. "Tonight wasn't even about anything important," he said. "It was supposed to be a routine trust update. Nothing worth this kind of cruelty." He turned her hand over gently in his. "If they'll do this over nothing, I need to understand what they'd do over something that actually mattered." Kamaria's fingers tightened around his. "Then let's find out," she said. Taehyun called Minso before the last car had even cleared the front gate. She'd worked for his family since before he could remember, first as his father's assistant, now as the one person inside the house whose loyalty had never once wavered or needed testing. "I need you to look into something," he said, standing in his study with the door closed. Kamaria seated across from him with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "Tonight's seating chart. Who arranged it?" "Your aunt usually handles seating for family dinners. I know who usually handles it. I want to know who actually did it this time, and I want the guest list cross-checked against who wasn't invited." Minso was quiet for a moment. "You think tonight wasn't an accident?" "I think my wife has been serving dinner in her own house for 2 years and I only just found out." His jaw tightened. "Nothing about that feels like an accident to me anymore." By the next afternoon, Minso had answers. She laid a printed guest list on his desk. Several names circled in red, others crossed out entirely. Every relative who's ever pushed back on how the family treats Kamaria was left off this list, she said. "Your cousin Jaewon, who married outside the family himself and never had patience for this nonsense, not invited. Your father's younger sister, who always insisted Kamaria sit at the head table, conveniently out of town, though I checked, and she wasn't. So someone lied to keep her away. Someone curated the entire room," Minseo said. "Every guest who attended last night either actively participated in what happened to Kamaria, or sat there and let it happen without objecting." She paused. "Except one. Ariam." Minseo nodded. "She's 19. Not exactly positioned to challenge her mother in front of the whole family, but she's the only name on this list who doesn't fit the pattern." Kamaria, silent until now, finally spoke. "She apologized to me this morning, came by early, before you were even up." Taehyun looked at her. "What did she say?" "That she wanted to say something last night and didn't. That she's been watching this happen for 2 years too, and hating herself a little more every time she stayed quiet." Kamaria wrapped both hands around her cold tea. She also mentioned something odd. She overheard her mother on the phone last week, saying the dinner needed to happen before some paperwork was finalized. She didn't understand what it meant. She just remembered it felt important. Taehyun's eyes sharpened. "What paperwork?" "She doesn't know." He looked at Minso. "Find out." Minso hesitated before adding one more detail. "There's something else about tonight, something that's been bothering me since the moment you walked through that door a day early. I came back early because the Busan meeting fell through," Taehyun said. "It fell through because someone canceled the venue booking 2 days before you were scheduled to arrive, Min-so said. I checked this morning, once I started pulling threads. The cancellation came from an assistant's email address that doesn't match anyone on your actual travel team. Someone impersonated your office to cancel a meeting they knew would send you home exactly 1 day early. Taehyun stared at her. You're saying someone engineered my early return. I'm saying it looks that way, Min-so said. Which means whoever arranged tonight's dinner wasn't hoping you'd stay away. They needed you home, walking in unannounced, distracted and furious over how your family treated Kamaria, occupied with something personal and painful enough that you wouldn't be thinking about estate paperwork at all for the next several days. Kamaria's hand found the back of a chair, steadying herself against the realization. They used what happened to me on purpose, not as bad luck they had to work around, as the plan itself. It fits everything else, Taehyun said grimly. The guest list, whatever paperwork Ariam overheard about, all of it moves around one goal: keep me looking somewhere else while the real work happens. He sat with that for a moment, turning it over, hating how neatly it explained the whole night. Someone knew me well enough to predict exactly how I'd react. Knew I'd come home, see something like that, and spend the next several days consumed by it instead of paying attention to anything else. Someone who's known you your whole life, Min-so said quietly. 3 days later, a call came in from the family's longtime attorney, Mr. Beck, requesting a minor signature update on an unrelated property matter. Ordinary business, the kind of thing that happened once a month without anyone thinking twice about it. Kamaria offered to handle it, since Taehyun was tied up with a security briefing that afternoon, and Mr. Beck's office was only a short drive from the estate. She sat across from him in his cluttered downtown office, signing where he indicated, half paying attention until her eyes caught a folder on the corner of his desk, slightly open, a document visible inside, with a signature at the bottom that made her stomach drop. Mr. Beck. She kept her voice level. Whose file is that? He glanced over, distracted. Oh, apologies. That shouldn't be out. Family trust documentation. Is that my father-in-law's signature? Something shifted in Baekik's expression, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. It should be. This is an amendment filed 3 weeks ago. Kamaria's chest tightened. Mr. Baek. My father-in-law has been dead for 14 months. The color drained slowly from the attorney's face as the implication landed. He reached for the folder with hands that weren't quite steady, flipping through pages he clearly hadn't examined closely enough the first time. That can't be right. I processed this myself. The paperwork came through the usual channels, properly notarized. I never had reason to. I need a copy of that, Kamaria said, already reaching for her phone. Now, if you don't mind. She called Taehyun from the car, before she'd even pulled out of the parking lot, voice steady, despite the way her hands weren't. You need to come home, she said. I found something. Taehyun stared at the document spread across his desk that evening, his father's signature at the bottom in ink that looked exactly right and meant exactly nothing, because the man whose hand had supposedly written it had been buried over a year before the date on the page. Someone forged this, he said quietly. Someone forged this and got it past a notary, Kamaria said. Which means it's not just one person acting alone. If this story's got you holding your breath already, that's exactly where we want you. Hit like, drop a comment on who you think is really behind all this, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope so you're here when the truth comes out. Min-so, standing near the door, spoke carefully. I pulled everything I could on the trust amendment. It cuts 3 relatives out of succession entirely. Your aunt, your uncle, and 1 cousin, removed from any future claim on family assets, effective immediately upon your father's death. But my father's been dead for over a year, Taehyun said. If this amendment had actually been filed when he was alive, it would have already taken effect. Exactly, Min-so said, which means whoever did this needed the paperwork to look retroactive. They needed it to look like your father made this decision himself, before he died, rather than someone making it for him after the fact. Kamaria sat forward. Why would anyone forge a document that cuts themselves out of the family fortune? They wouldn't, Taehyun said slowly, the pieces settling into place with a weight he didn't like. Which means this wasn't written by my aunt or uncle at all. It was written by whoever benefits from removing them. The room went quiet. Someone's clearing a path, Min-so said, and they used Kamaria's humiliation at that dinner to make sure you were distracted enough not to notice. Taehyun looked at his wife, guilt and fury moving across his face in equal measure. They used what they did to you, he said, as cover. Minso brought in a forensic document examiner 2 days later, a quiet, precise woman named Ji-yeon, who worked out of a small office that smelled like ink and old paper. She spread the forged trust amendment across a light box, studied it under magnification for nearly 20 minutes without saying a word, occasionally making small notes on a legal pad. "The signature's good," Ji-yeon said finally. "Good enough to fool a notary who wasn't looking closely. Not good enough to fool me." "What gave it away?" Taehyun asked. "Pressure inconsistency. Your father's real signature, from the samples you gave me, shows a specific hesitation right before the final stroke, like his hand paused for half a second every time. This signature doesn't have that pause. Whoever forged it studied the shape well enough to copy it, but they never watched him actually sign anything in real time. So it's someone who had access to old documents," Kamaria said, "but not someone who actually spent time with him while he was alive." Ji-yeon nodded. "That's my read. There's something else, too." She pointed to a second signature further down the page. "The notary stamp. It's real. This is an actual licensed notary's seal. But the notary's signature beside it doesn't match samples on file with the state registry. Someone forged the notary's signature too, using a legitimate stamp." Taehyun's jaw tightened. "Which notary?" "According to the seal, it belongs to a woman named Park Soo-jin, works out of a small office 2 towns over. I already checked. She's real, she's licensed, and when I called her office this morning, she had no record of ever notarizing anything for your family." "So either she's lying," Minso said, "or someone stole her seal." They found Park Soo-jin's office that afternoon, a cramped storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the shared wall. She was younger than Taehyun expected, nervous the moment he introduced himself, hands twisting together before he'd even finished explaining why he was there. "I didn't notarize anything for your family," she said quickly. "I would remember something that significant." "Your seal was used," Taehyun said, sliding a copy of the document across her desk. "Someone had access to it." Her face went pale as she studied the page. "My seal was stolen. 3 months ago, I filed a police report, but nothing ever came of it. Small theft, no leads. They told me to just get a replacement issued and move on." "Do you remember exactly when it went missing?" She thought for a moment, then pulled up an old calendar on her phone, scrolling back with quick, nervous taps. "The last week of March. I remember because I had a dinner reservation I had to cancel that same week. Everything felt off that whole month." Kamaria's eyes met Taehyun's. "The last week of March was 3 weeks before his father's death. Who had access to your office that week?" Taehyun asked. "Clients mostly. I don't keep a strict log. I probably should." She stopped herself, something clicking into place behind her eyes. "Wait, there was a woman. Came in for a routine notarization on some property paperwork, completely unrelated to any of this. Older, well-dressed, very polite. She was here maybe 20 minutes, and I stepped out briefly to grab coffee for both of us. I never thought twice about it." "Would you recognize her again?" Soo-jin nodded slowly. "I think so. Yes." Taehyun pulled up a photo on his phone. A family portrait from 2 Christmases ago. Everyone gathered in front of the estate's grand staircase, dressed in their formal best. He pointed to a woman near the edge of the frame. Soo-jin studied it for a long moment, then nodded. "Certain now." "That's her," she said. "That's the woman who was in my office." Taehyun's finger rested on the image of his aunt, but something in his expression shifted. Not triumph, not even anger exactly. Confusion. "That doesn't make sense," he said slowly. "Min Soo said this document cuts my aunt out of the succession entirely. Why would she forge a document that removes herself from the family fortune?" Kamaria's stomach turned over as the pieces rearranged themselves in her mind. "Unless she's not the one who benefits," she said quietly. "Unless she stole the seal for someone else." Nobody spoke for a moment, the small office suddenly feeling too warm, too close. Minso pulled out her phone and started typing something fast, cross-referencing something none of them had thought to check yet. "If she was working for someone else," Taehyun said slowly, "then this isn't just about a document. It's about who's controlling the whole plan, and my aunt might just be a piece of it, not the architect." They drove back to the estate in silence, the photograph still open on Taehyun's phone, his aunt's face staring back at him from a Christmas 2 years gone. He found her in the study she'd claimed as her own since his father's death, going through correspondence at a wide mahogany desk, reading glasses perched low on her nose. "We need to talk," Taehyun said, closing the door behind him. His aunt looked up, something guarded settling behind her eyes the moment she saw his face. About the dinner? About Park Soo-jin's office. He set his phone down on her desk, the photograph still visible. She identified you. 3 months ago, the last week of March. Her notary seal went missing the same day you were there. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone sharp. You forged my father's signature on a trust amendment that cuts you, your husband, and your son out of succession entirely. I had nothing to do with any forgery, his aunt said. Too quickly, too rehearsed. I don't know where you're getting your information, but Park Soo-jin has already given a formal statement to a document examiner, Taehyun said. Her seal, stolen from her office the last week of March, the same week you canceled a dinner reservation and told your husband you were handling errands all afternoon. I have her signed statement. I have a forensic comparison of the forged signature. I have the timeline. What I don't have yet is a reason, and you're the only person who can give me one before I hand all of this to the police, instead of asking you myself. His aunt's hands, folded on the desk, went white at the knuckles. For a long moment she said nothing, staring at some fixed point past his shoulder, calculating. Taehyun could see her calculating, weighing what was actually still hers to protect. If I tell you everything, she said finally, you need to understand I never wanted any of this to go as far as it has. I need that understood before I say another word. Tell me first. We'll talk about what I understand after. She exhaled, something in her finally giving way. Not because she wanted to, Taehyun realized, but because she'd run out of room to keep denying it. Your cousin, Jaewon's brother, Minjun. Taehyun went very still. Minjun hasn't been part of this family in years. He left after the falling out with his father, moved to Busan, cut off contact with almost everyone. He came back 6 months ago, his aunt said, quietly, started reaching out to family members individually, one at a time, saying he wanted to make amends, rebuild relationships. Her hands twisted together. He came to me first, told me he'd found evidence your father intended to change the succession before he died, that the version everyone knew wasn't accurate, that he had access to documents that could prove it. And you believed him. He was convincing. Her voice wavered. He said the amendment restored things to how they should have been generations ago, his father's branch of the family, written back into the line of succession, the same branch that got cut out 30 years ago when your father inherited everything instead. He said, cutting me, your uncle, and your cousin out was temporary, a legal formality to clear the path, and that once everything's settled, there'd be a second document reinstating all of us under the corrected line. He just needed the first part filed quickly, quietly, before anyone thought to check the details too closely. Taehyun's jaw tightened. There's no second document. I know that now. His aunt's composure cracked further. I only understood once it was already too late to undo it. Kamaria, standing quietly near the doorway, spoke carefully. If the amendment restores his father's branch, why does he need you dead, Taehyun? Wouldn't the paperwork just take effect on its own? Not while I'm alive and running the estate, Taehyun said slowly, working through it out loud. I sign off on every major trust decision personally. The moment I laid eyes on that amendment, I'd have caught the same thing you did, a dead man's signature on a live document. I'd have had it thrown out within a week. His expression hardened. But if I'm gone, and there's no immediate direct heir contesting it, the amendment doesn't get challenged by the one person meticulous enough to catch the forgery. It gets absorbed into probate by a family council that has no reason to question paperwork that already looks settled. So he needs the will filed while your father still looks alive enough to have signed it, Kamaria said. And he needs you gone before you're the one reviewing it. Both parts only work together, Taehyun said quietly. The forgery buys the outcome. My death buys the silence. His aunt looked between them, something breaking further in her face. I didn't know about that part. I swear to you, Taehyun, I never knew he meant to hurt you. What about tonight's dinner? Kamaria asked. What about what you did to me? His aunt looked at her for a long moment, something like genuine shame crossing her face for the first time. Minjun asked for it specifically, she said. Said Taehyun needed to be distracted, upset, focused on family drama rather than paying attention to anything happening with the estate paperwork this week. He said the timing mattered. She swallowed hard. I didn't know what the timing was for. I swear to you I didn't know. Taehyun's phone buzzed against the desk. Minso, calling with something urgent enough that she'd tried 3 times in the last minute. He answered. his aunt's confession still hanging heavy in the room. Taehyun. Minso's voice was tight, controlled in the specific way it only got when something was seriously wrong. I need you to listen to me carefully. I just found something in the household security logs. Your evening security detail, the one scheduled for tonight, it was quietly reassigned 3 days ago. Reduced by half, and the 2 guards pulled from rotation were both replaced with new hires. Hires that came through an agency Minjun has ties to. 3 days ago, Taehyun repeated slowly. That's the same day Kamaria found the folder in Bake's office. There's something else, Minso said. The agency those 2 new hires came through. It traces back to Minjun through a shell company, but barely. Whoever set this up did it fast. And fast means sloppy. This isn't the work of someone patient enough to steal a notary seal and study a dead man's signature for weeks. He moved up his timeline, Taehyun said, understanding hitting him at once. Kamaria finding that folder forced his hand. He wasn't ready to move yet. We pushed him into it. That tracks, Minso said. A careful plan rushed under pressure looks exactly like this. Real enough to work, careless enough to trace. If anyone's looking fast enough. A pause. We were looking fast enough. Taehyun felt something cold settle in his chest. Tonight, he said quietly. Taehyun. Minso's voice dropped lower. I think whatever this is, it's happening tonight. If this story's got you sitting on the edge of your seat, that's exactly where we want you. Hit like, drop a comment on what you think Minjun's next move is, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope so you're here for the rest of this story. Taehyun didn't hang up the phone. He set it down on the desk, speaker still open, and looked at his aunt. Get out of this room, he said. Go to the east wing, lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Whatever else is true about tonight, I don't think you're the one who wants me dead. His aunt didn't argue. She left fast, the confession still hanging in the air behind her, her footsteps disappearing down the hallway, quick and uneven, nothing like her usual composed stride. Minso, Taehyun said into the phone. The 2 new guards. Where are they positioned right now? One at the front gate, one covering the east perimeter near the garden entrance. I already tried reaching the head of security directly. He's not answering. Because he's probably one of the 2 who got sent home early, Taehyun said grimly. Pull every camera feed you can access remotely. I want eyes on both of those positions in the next 60 seconds. Kamaria was already moving, checking the study door, testing that it locked properly, pulling the heavy curtains closed against the windows, moving through the room with a focus that surprised even her. You don't have to do that, Taehyun said. I'm not doing it for you. She turned to face him, steady despite everything. I'm doing it because I'm not losing you tonight, after finally getting you back at that dinner table. Minso's voice came back through the phone. I've got the garden entrance feed. The new hire's not at his post. I don't see him anywhere on camera. And the front gate? A pause, longer this time. Also empty. Taehyun's jaw tightened. They're already inside. He crossed to the study's second door, the one that led to a narrow servants' hallway rarely used by the family, motioning for Kamaria to follow. This connects to the kitchen, he said quietly. From there, the security office is 2 doors down. If Minso can get eyes on the interior cameras, we can figure out exactly where they are before they figure out where we are. They moved fast and quiet through the narrow hallway, Taehyun in front, Kamaria close behind him, both of them listening for footsteps that weren't their own, the old floorboards creaking softly beneath their feet no matter how carefully they stepped. They found the security office exactly as they'd left it that morning, except the main monitor bank was dark, screens black where live feeds should have been running. Someone cut the internal feed, Taehyun said, but not the external one Minso's watching remotely, Kamaria said, which means whoever did this doesn't know she has outside access. Taehyun's phone buzzed again. A text this time, not a call, from Minso. Movement near the study. 2 men. One matches Minjun's build from old photos. Get somewhere secure now. Taehyun's hand found Kamaria's without either of them saying anything, pulling her toward a narrow stairwell that led down to the estate's wine cellar. Thick stone walls, a door that locked from the inside, a space his father had once shown him as a boy, half joking that every house like this one needed somewhere to disappear, if it ever came to that. They made it down the stairs just as voices echoed faintly from the hallway above, careful and low, the kind of quiet that only came from people trying very hard not to be heard. Taehyun eased the cellar door shut, turned the lock, and pressed his back against the cold stone wall. Kamaria beside him, both of them breathing hard in the dark. Minjun's here, he whispered. In my house, tonight. Not just here, Kamaria whispered back, pulling out her own phone. The screen's glow, the only light in the cellar. Ariam just texted me. She turned the screen toward him. A message, sent 4 minutes ago. Found something on my mom's tablet. A message thread with Minjun from last week. He knew exactly when the security detail would be short tonight. He planned this around Taehyun being home. Please tell me you're both okay. I'm scared. Taehyun stared at the message. The full shape of the conspiracy finally, completely visible. The dinner, the forged will, the stolen seal, the reassigned guards, all of it converging on this exact night. This exact house, timed with a precision that meant Minjun had been planning this for months, only forced to accelerate at the very end. Footsteps sounded directly above them now, slow and deliberate, moving across the wine cellar's ceiling. Kamaria's hand tightened around his in the dark. They know we're not upstairs anymore, she whispered. They're looking for us. The footsteps stopped directly above the cellar door. Neither of them moved. The footsteps above stayed still for a long moment, then shifted, pacing slowly across the floor overhead, boards groaning under a deliberate, unhurried weight. Taehyun's phone buzzed again in his hand. Screen brightness turned all the way down. Minso's message glowing faint in the dark. Police are 11 minutes out. I called them the second I saw the reassigned detail. Stay hidden. Do not engage. He showed the screen to Kamaria. She nodded, jaw tight, both of them pressing further back against the cold stone. The footsteps moved again, further away this time, toward the far end of the hallway. They're checking the other rooms first, Taehyun whispered. This isn't the obvious place to look. How long has your father known about this cellar? Since before I was born. It's not on any of the house blueprints filed with the county. He had it built off the books. Said every family needs one room the rest of the world doesn't know exists. Taehyun's voice was barely audible. I never thought I'd actually need it. 11 minutes had never felt so long in his life. He counted his own heartbeat instead of the seconds. Kamaria's hand still locked around his, both of them listening to a house that had stopped feeling like home the moment those footsteps started moving through it. Kamaria's phone buzzed silently in her hand. Another message from Ariam. My mom just left the house in a panic. I think she called someone. I don't know who. I'm scared for both of you. Your aunt, Kamaria whispered. She's not part of this anymore, Taehyun said. Not tonight. Whatever she did before, locking herself in the east wing was the smart move. He paused, listening as the footsteps above grew fainter, moving toward the far side of the house. But if she left the property in a panic, she might be trying to reach Minjun. Warn him. Or she might be running from him too. The minutes stretched on, silent and endless, the two of them counting seconds in the dark. At some point Kamaria's hand found his again, fingers laced together, steadying each other through a fear neither one said out loud. The cellar smelled like dust and old wood, wine bottles stacked in neat rows along the walls, none of it mattering at all next to the sound of their own breathing. Tell me something true, Kamaria whispered, needing something to hold on to besides the dark. Anything. I don't care what. Taehyun thought for a moment. The first time I saw you cross that ballroom, I'd already decided I was going to marry you, before we'd even spoken. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I didn't know the first thing about you, and I still couldn't make myself stop thinking it. That's not true. It's true enough that I remember exactly what song was playing, he said. Something slow. I couldn't tell you the name of it now if my life depended on it, which tonight, apparently it does. A weak, startled laugh escaped her, quickly swallowed back down. You're an idiot. I've been told. Then, faint at first, growing louder, sirens. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, tires on gravel outside. Footsteps above them broke into a run, no longer careful, no longer quiet. Moving fast toward what sounded like the back of the house. Taehyun's phone lit up with Minso's next message. Police at the front gate. Perimeter units moving in. I'm patching them the interior blueprints now, including the cellar. Do not come out until they clear the house room by room. This is almost over. Voices rose upstairs, sharp and urgent. Orders being shouted in Korean and English both. The distinctive sound of a house being swept by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Heavy boots crossed the floor above them, doors slamming open one after another as the search moved methodically through every room. Somewhere farther off, a single shout cut through the rest. Short, clipped, the sound of someone being caught, rather than someone giving chase. Kamaria's grip on his hand tightened at the noise. That's a good sound, Taehyun murmured. That's someone getting caught, not someone getting hurt. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I need to believe it for the next few minutes, so let's believe it together. It took nearly 20 minutes before a careful knock sounded against the cellar door. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. The signal Minso had relayed through the police the moment she confirmed the room's location. Taehyun, it's clear. You can come out. He unlocked the door slowly, stepping out first, Kamaria close behind him, both of them blinking against the sudden brightness of the hallway lights, now fully restored. Minso stood at the top of the stairs, relief breaking visibly across her composed face for the first time all night. Behind her, uniformed officers moved through the house, and near the front entrance, in handcuffs, stood a man Taehyun hadn't seen in 6 years. Minjun looked older than his photographs, harder around the eyes, his expensive suit rumpled from the struggle it had apparently taken to bring him down. He didn't struggle now. He simply watched Taehyun cross the hallway toward him, something unreadable settling over his face. You should have stayed in Busan, Taehyun said quietly. I should have inherited what was mine from the start, Minjun said, no remorse in his voice, only old, worn resentment. Your father chose you over my father 30 years ago, and everyone just accepted it, generation after generation. Like it was destiny instead of a choice someone made. I was just correcting the record. You forged a dead man's signature and tried to have me killed in my own home. I tried to take back what should have been mine, Minjun said. You were never even supposed to survive tonight to hear the difference. There was never a second document, was there? Taehyun said. No reinstatement for my aunt's branch. No correction. You just needed her desperate enough to steal a seal and forge a signature, and desperate people don't ask enough questions. Something flickered across Minjun's face, the closest thing to acknowledgement he'd offer. She was useful, he said simply. And the guards you bought? Also useful, until they weren't careful enough. Minjun's jaw tightened at that, the first crack in his own composure all night. Everyone makes mistakes when they're rushed. You rushed because we were faster than you expected, Taehyun said. That's not my mistake to carry. That's yours. An officer stepped forward, guiding him toward the door, and Minjun went without further resistance, his composure intact even in defeat. Like a man who'd simply lost 1 round of a much longer game, he still believed he could win eventually. Taehyun watched him go, something in his chest finally loosening after hours of held tension. Kamaria stepped up beside him, slipping her hand into his. It's over, she said quietly. Almost, he said, watching the patrol car pull away down the long gravel drive, red and blue lights sweeping briefly across the estate's front windows, before fading into the dark. There's still my aunt to deal with, and whatever's left to untangle in that trust. But not tonight, Kamaria said. No. He turned to look at her fully, exhaustion and something warmer moving across his face at once. Not tonight. They stood together on the front steps for a long while after the last patrol car disappeared down the drive, neither of them ready to go back inside, the night air cool against skin that had spent the last hour pressed against cold stone. Minso eventually joined them, wordlessly handing each of them a blanket from somewhere inside, sitting down on the top step without being asked, none of them saying much of anything until the sky started turning gray at the edges. If you've made it this far, you already know this story's building to something big. Hit like, drop a comment on what you think happens to Taehyun's aunt now, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope so you're here for the finale. 3 days later, Taehyun sat across from his aunt in the same study where she'd confessed, though the room felt different now, lighter somehow, despite everything still unresolved between them. She'd come back the morning after the arrest, exhausted and hollowed out, having spent the night driving aimlessly rather than fleeing anywhere real. She turned herself in to Minso before Taehyun even asked her to, laying out everything she knew about Minjun's plan in careful, precise detail, cooperation clearly her only path forward now. The prosecutor's office says your cooperation matters, Taehyun said. It won't erase what you did, but it matters for the criminal case. I know that's not forgiveness, his aunt said quietly. I'm not asking for it. Good, because I don't have it to give yet. He folded his hands on the desk between them. But I need you to understand something clearly. The forgery, Minjun, the assassination attempt, that's the court's business now, and it's separate from what happens with this family. What does that mean? It means I called a family council this morning, Taehyun said. Not about the estate, about Kamaria. Every adult member of this family with a voice in how we operate was informed, formally, on record, that any treatment of her the way she was treated at that dinner, being denied a seat, being handed a serving tray, being spoken about like she wasn't in the room, will result in immediate and permanent removal from any family gathering, function, or estate matter, regardless of blood relation. I had it written into the family charter this afternoon. It's not a suggestion anymore. It's a rule, with consequences attached, the same as any other rule this family actually enforces. His aunt looked up, something like genuine surprise breaking through her exhaustion. You did that today. Separate from all of this. Because what you did to her was never actually about the estate, Taehyun said. Minjun used it as cover, yes, but you didn't need his permission to treat her that way for 2 years before he ever came back into this family's life. That part is on you, specifically, and it needed its own consequence, not buried inside a criminal case about money and forged paperwork. He held her gaze. You don't get to sit at that table again. Not the council, not family dinners, not until you've actually reckoned with what you did to her, separate from whatever the court decides about the rest of it. His aunt's composure finally cracked all the way. Tears she'd been holding back for days finally breaking free. I don't know how to fix that, she said. I don't know if it can be fixed. Then start by figuring out how to actually see her, Taehyun said. Not as an outsider you tolerated, as my wife. As someone who held this family together, with more grace than any of you deserved, including me, for staying blind to it for 2 years. She didn't answer right away. She sat with her hands folded on the desk, staring down at them like she might find some kind of instruction written across her own palms. I'll try, she said finally. That's all I can promise right now, that I'll try. Ariam found Kamaria in the garden that same afternoon, sitting alone near the fountain, the first quiet moment either of them had managed since the night everything came apart. The late afternoon light caught the water in gold, and somewhere behind them a gardener was clipping something back for the season. Can I sit? Ariam asked. Kamaria nodded, shifting over on the bench. I keep thinking about that dinner, Ariam said, staring at her hands. How close I came to just staying silent, the way I always have. If I hadn't said something to you the next morning, if I hadn't remembered that phone call. But you did, Kamaria said. That's what matters. It shouldn't have taken me 2 years to find the courage to say something small, Ariam said. You handled 2 years of that with more grace than I've ever managed with anything in my whole life. Kamaria studied the younger woman's face, remembering herself at 19, remembering exactly how much courage it took the first time she'd ever stood her ground against something bigger than herself. Grace isn't the same as staying quiet, Kamaria said gently. I spent 2 years being quiet because I thought it was the price of belonging somewhere. I was wrong. You figured that out faster than I did. Ariam's eyes filled, and she didn't try to hide it. Will you teach me how to actually stand up for people, the way you did that night, even when you didn't say a single word? Kamaria reached over and took her hand. I think you already know how, she said. You just needed someone to believe you'd actually do it. Ariam's mother was arrested 6 days after Minjun, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction. Her cooperation with prosecutors far less forthcoming than her sister-in-law's had been. She fought the charges for 3 months before a plea deal reduced her sentence, in exchange for full testimony against Minjun's remaining associates. Ariam visited her exactly once during that stretch, sitting across a table in a visitation room that smelled like bleach and old coffee. Why didn't you just come to me? Her mother asked. Why did you go to them instead of your own family? Because you asked me to watch someone humiliated at our dinner table and say nothing, Ariam said. And I did that for 2 years. I'm done being the kind of family member who says nothing. She didn't visit again after that. It wasn't cruelty, she told Kamaria later, just clarity. Some relationships couldn't survive the truth, and she'd rather grieve the one she'd lost than keep pretending it hadn't already ended the night of that dinner. The trial for Minjun took 4 months to resolve, ending in a conviction on charges of forgery, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence collected across that single night, the guest list, the forged signature analysis, Ariam's message thread, Min Seo's security logs, assembled into a case airtight enough that no amount of family money or old loyalty could unravel it. At sentencing, Minjun said only one thing directly to Taehyun, turning from the defendant's table before they let him out. 30 years from now, he said, someone in your own bloodline will look at what you built and decide it should have been theirs instead. That's not prophecy. That's just this family. Taehyun didn't answer him. He didn't need to. The difference, he understood now, wasn't whether resentment would ever surface again in a family this large. It was whether anyone would still be standing in a doorway, silent, when it did. He intended to make sure someone always would be. Taehyun's aunt and uncle faced lesser charges, cooperation earning them reduced sentences rather than acquittal, their standing within the family permanently altered regardless of what any court decided. The family charter Taehyun had written that afternoon in his study held exactly as he'd promised. No exceptions made. No quiet reversals whispered through relatives hoping enough time would soften the rule back into something forgettable. 2 distant cousins tested it within the first month, making an offhand comment about Kamaria's cooking at a smaller gathering, and found themselves quietly, permanently uninvited from every family occasion that followed. Nobody tested it again after that. 6 months after the night in the wine cellar, the estate hosted a family dinner again, smaller this time, the guest list curated not by tradition or obligation, but by Taehyun and Kamaria together, every name chosen deliberately, every seat assigned with actual care. Aryam sat close to them now, no longer relegated to a distant table, laughing at something Minso said as she poured wine, fully part of the family in a way she'd never quite been allowed to be before. She still carried the quiet weight of her mother's absence, some evenings more than others, but she carried it the way a person carries something they chose rather than something forced onto them. With her spine straight, the same way Kamaria had once carried a serving tray she refused to lift. She'd started law school that fall, something about the whole ordeal having sharpened an interest in exactly the kind of documents that had almost destroyed her family, and Taehyun had quietly covered her first semester's tuition without being asked, the closest thing to an apology he knew how to give her. Kamaria sat at the head of the table beside her husband, her own place setting exactly where it belonged, no tray in her hands, no question of whether she'd earned her seat. She wore blue that night, not the red from the ballroom 2 years earlier, but something about the way the candlelight caught her face reminded Taehyun of that first evening anyway, of watching her cross a room like she owned it before she'd ever set foot in his family's world. Taehyun watched her across the candlelight, the same warm glow from that first terrible dinner, now holding something entirely different in the room. Not tension, not cruelty dressed up as tradition, just a family finally built on people who'd chosen, deliberately, to stand beside each other when it actually counted. He stood, glass in hand, and the table quieted on its own this time, nobody needing to be silenced. A year ago, almost to the week, my wife stood at this table holding a tray because someone in this family decided that was her place. His eyes moved slowly around the room, landing briefly on the empty chairs that had once belonged to people no longer welcome here, then settling on Kamaria. I watched it happen from that doorway, and I didn't move fast enough. I've had a year to think about why. The honest answer is that I trusted the wrong people for a long time, simply because they shared my blood, and I mistook that for meaning they'd earned my trust. He looked at Aryam, then at Minso, then finally back to his wife. Blood was never the thing that decided who belonged in this house. It just took me 30 years and one very bad night to understand that the people worth keeping are the ones who show up for you when nobody's watching, and the ones brave enough to finally speak when everyone else stays quiet. He raised his glass higher. To the people who stayed, and to the ones brave enough to finally say something, glasses lifted around the table. Kamaria's hand found his beneath the tablecloth, steady, warm, no longer hidden from anyone, and she didn't let go for the rest of the night. Not through dessert, not through the slow drift of guests toward the door, not until the candles had burned all the way down, and the two of them were alone in the quiet house they'd finally, actually built together. Later, standing on the same front steps where they'd once watched a patrol car disappear into the dark, Kamaria leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about the tray?" she asked. "That night, before you walked in. Every day," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to being a man who didn't notice at all. But you did notice. Eventually," he said. "I'd like to be the kind of man who notices immediately, next time, before there's a next time to notice anything at all." The family had once decided who belonged at that table without ever asking her. They never made that mistake again. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Hit like, tell us in the comments what part hit you hardest, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Scope. Because this family's story might be over, but there's always another one waiting for you here.